Okay, hello everybody. So we're going to talk about pluralist theories of democracy, and particularly the one Dahl discusses, and then we'll talk about capitalism and democracy. Two different views here, one from Bowles and Gintis and one from Friedman, on whether or not capitalism and democracy can really get along. But first to talk about Dahl and the pluralist theory of democracy. So we've got this nice quote that you all read in the previous weeks. Government derives its power from the consent of the governed. That's a wonderful idea, this kind of Jeffersonian ideal. We don't kind of live under a government, we provide the government with its power. And that's a good idea, right? That we don't want to have dictators, we don't want to have monarchs, we want to give our consent to the government. But it's the why is easy. How is actually really problematic, even if you just think about it a little bit. And so he points out some real problems with the idea of a government that gains consent from the governed. First of all, none of us consented to the current system of government. The current system of government was created a long time ago by people that we never met. We were born into this system. And so none of us really has the option for backing out. We can think about some solutions, and he's very much echoing the thoughts from the Federalist Papers when he's talking about this area. So, what do we do when we have a lot of conflict around different policy ideas? The first is we could just say there's no conflict. We could eliminate conflict, make sure everybody has the same opinions. That's a terrible idea. This is where you get re-education camps and you get totalitarian solutions where you try and get everybody to at least seem like they have the same opinions, but nobody ever is really going to have the same opinions. You could restrict policies to those that were only given with unanimous consent. Unanimity seems like a promising idea, right? We should all agree. And in small societies, Aboriginal societies, within groups where you're talking about villages of 100, 150 people, which is a kind of a normal size for a lot of groups of people, this is the principle. You just talk and talk and talk until you get unanimity. It takes a really long time. It's very difficult, and it breaks down as you get into larger and larger groups. Just try and think about if you've ever tried to get a large group of people to agree on where to go to dinner. To get a dozen people where every single person agrees on the place where you're going to go out to dinner. So this relatively trivial thing that you're trying to accomplish, and you're working with a very small group of people, and it's really hard. It'll take forever. It's really impossible. You just have to make most of the people happy. So what do we do? And what Dahl says we do is we gain consent for a process. Instead of thinking that every policy's got to be popular with every person, we're not going to have that. Instead, what we should say is, well, let's have a process that everybody can agree to. And the key nature of this process is that it has to give everybody a chance to have their views known. Nobody can be silenced. Nobody can be stopped from participating in the process. And that's the kind of process that people are pretty likely to consent to. So then Dahl gets into, okay, why don't we just go with majority rule? Why don't we just have, majority rule on everything? There's real problems with just a pure majority rule system. The first is the majority could be morally wrong. And we can point to many examples in our own history where the majority, at least the majority of the voting population, we would currently view as being morally wrong. That includes laws around slavery. That includes laws banning the economic and civic participation of women, laws around segregation. The majority of voting citizens in these cases were morally wrong. And if you read the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail, he talks about this, that there are unjust and just laws. And the fact that a majority passed a law does not make it just. Okay, so you might have a minority that's permanently dissatisfied with the government. What can they do? Well, one thing you could do is you could kick them out. America, love it or leave it. You can say, if you are going to just always be unhappy with the policies that are in place, we will kick you out. That's Not a good idea. That's Dahl suggests, that's just another form of tyranny. You can also you can not necessarily kick people out, but you can say, well, you can leave. If you're going to be unhappy with the way the policy works in our country, you're always free to leave. New Zealand's an option. Actually, it's not, but New Zealand's an option for you. Or maybe the minority should secede. If the minority is in a geographically contiguous area, they could all just say, look, we can't get along, let's just split off and we'll form our own country. And Lincoln, he quotes Lincoln on this, and Lincoln was, among many other people, was clear on why this can't be the case. If the minority always has this ability, this threat to secede, a country can't exist because it'll just keep on splitting. What you get from then on is just this continuous. It's like either, the majority doesn't get to do anything because the minority says we'll secede if you do that, or you get the country constantly splitting into smaller and smaller pieces. You can't do either of that. So, and then we've got this problem that the current form of government isn't decided by each generation of citizens. Okay, so we have to have a pluralist solution to these problems. And the first thing that Dahl points out is that uh, it's not as neat as some of our founding texts make it seem. The way our government works isn't just about what the people want or the people giving consent to the government. We use force to ensure compulsory citizenship. None of us have the ability to refuse citizenship and continue living here. We can't just say, you know what, forget it. I don't really like being an American citizen. I'm not going to move. I'm not going to go to another country. I'm just going to say, yeah, it's not me. It's not for me. I don't want to pay taxes or be a member of this country. You will very quickly encounter force from the state to compel you to undertake your responsibilities as a citizen, prime among them, obeying the state's laws and paying taxes. Okay, but one of the ways that we use to structure our system so that a permanent minority isn't necessarily always dissatisfied is that we place certain matters of policy beyond government power. Now, these include the rights in the Bill of Rights, and that's why we talked about those in depth. And they could extend beyond that, a right to privacy. And there's also, government just doesn't tend to get much involved in certain aspects of our lives. There's a wide variety of ways in which people raise their children and the way families are structured. And government doesn't get into that. There's some, but not much. It doesn't get in, it stays effectively out of certain areas. So that you don't have to feel like government is always involved in every aspect of our lives. And then this last point is really important. If you're in a permanent minority in our system, and ours is Dahl holds up as an example of a pluralist system, you always have the ability to slow things down. You can participate in the negotiations over policy. We don't structure our policy such that minorities can't be in the game. This is any minority group that you could think of. They can delay policy, can slow it down, and we have a slow system. It's not agile. It's not fast. They can obstruct. We have all of these checks and balances that are built in across the system, and they allow for obstruction. Now, that's if you're a strong majoritarian and you just want policies in place and you want the majority views to be reflected in policy, that's going to be frustrating. Minorities can be a nuisance. They can just get in the way of policies being put in place, particularly the policies that they reject, the policies they don't want. And that's, according to Dahl, the beauty of our system. It's a pluralist system. So he writes, the theory and practice of American pluralism tend to assume, as I see it, that the existence of multiple centers of power, none of which is wholly sovereign, will help. It may indeed be necessary to tame power, to secure the consent of all, and to settle conflicts peacefully. So that's why we've got this structure that's so easy to slow down, because we have to distribute power across a lot of different centers to make sure that these issues with the sovereign majority are dealt with on a day-to-day basis. And that's what we mean when we talk about pluralism People are members of lots of groups. There's multiple centers of power. Everything's distributed across the system. Okay, so there you go. Instead of a single sovereign power, there must be multiple centers of power, none of which is or can be wholly sovereign. Okay, so that's Dahl's pluralist solution. Now we get into Bowles and Gintis and talking about these uneasy partners that we have in the American system. We have a democratically elected government and we have a capitalist society. Now, those two systems don't necessarily go together. You can have a capitalist society and a government that was not elected democratically. That's the largest economy in the world. The People's Republic of China does not have a democratically elected government and has essentially a capitalist system. It's they call it capitalist or communism with Chinese tendencies, and it's in many ways a capitalist system. But Bowles and Gintis suggest, in fact, that these two systems are fundamentally incompatible. They will always be in tension with one another. And here's why. Capitalism means, by definition, that some people get more than others. You can gain more power in an economic system. And the whole point is, in fact, to gain more wealth, more power. And the people with more power, more wealth, more money can do more in a capitalist system. Democracy says rather the opposite. Everybody counts the same. We don't, for instance, give more weight to a vote if it comes from a rich person than a poor person. We count votes one by one. So everybody, regardless of their education level, regardless of their wealth, regardless of where they live, their vote counts the same. And so it's all about personal rights. Capitalism is about privilege. Democracy is about personal rights that are inherent in everybody. So what happens when you try and get these two systems together? So what happens is that economic power continues to accumulate within a small group of people. That's economics, capitalist systems tend to, over time, accumulate wealth among a small group of people. And when that happens, that small group of people increasingly exercises more and more control over our political system. So let's take a look really quickly at opensecrets.org, and what they've got is the net worth of our congresspeople from 2012. I want to look, in fact, in the Senate. We'll look at net worth, which is just all your assets relative to your liabilities, and we're going to look at the poorest senators. Now, poor Mark Pryor of Arkansas doesn't seem to be doing all that great. He's got $8,500 in net worth. Go up the line. Chris Murphy of Connecticut has a net worth of $82,000. That's about the average net worth, the median net worth, the net worth at the 50th percentile among American families. About half of American families have an average net worth less than $80,000. That's the net worth of our third poorest senator. And then you see this big jump. As we get down to the bottom of this list, as we get to John Cornyn of Texas, he's got a net worth of $700,000. Let's go to the richest senators. All right, so we're looking at our top, 25 or so richest senators. Mark Warner of Virginia has a net worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $250 million. And we run down the list here. Barrasso of Wyoming has a net worth of $5.7 million. The net worth of our senators vastly exceeds the net worth of our population at large. So, and that's very, very true. That's typical over history. Is this a problem? Do we really have a political system where anybody can participate? And the House of Representatives is similar. And so this is something to think about for all of us. The capitalist system is one in which power inherently accumulates in the hands of a few people. Can those few people then exercise disproportionate control over our democratic system? Okay. So then we switch over to Milton Friedman. And what I've got here are some links. You can click on these links. Friedman is a remarkable commentator on economic matters and did a lot of kind of public outreach. He was a very, very respected academic economist, but did TV specials and debates and all this stuff. He was very, very active in the public sphere during his lifetime. And I encourage you to, these are very short things that you can take a look at on the web, where you can see Milton Friedman himself speak, and he's far more eloquent than I am. So, but just to summarize Friedman's view on this same question, can democracy and capitalism coexist? Friedman comes at this from a very different direction. And so he's saying that economic control is the government, like what Bowles and Gintas would kind of end up saying is that you've got to have government come in and take money from rich people and kind of distribute it across the society, because having all that money accumulate and with just some rich people means that they get all the political power, and so you've got to balance that, and democracy has to balance out that capitalist system. Friedman says almost exactly the opposite. He says, look, freedom is the same in every sphere. So freedom in terms of democracy is the same as freedom in the economic sphere. When you get government involved, when you start having government limit personal freedom, even personal economic freedom, it's just like political control. You are stamping out a vital aspect of people's lives, and you're not doing them any good. So it's this paragraph from Friedman says it nicely. Government can never duplicate the variety and diversity of individual action. At any moment in time, by imposing uniform standards in housing or nutrition or clothing, government could undoubtedly improve the level of living of many individuals. By imposing uniform standards in schooling, road construction, or sanitation, central government could undoubtedly improve the level of performance in many local areas, and perhaps even on the average of all communities. But in the process, government would replace progress by stagnation. It would substitute uniform mediocrity for the variety essential for that experimentation which can bring tomorrow's laggards above today's mean. So he's saying here that, that you're going to make the progress, and progress is the key to everything, much slower if you try and impose government control. And it's going to limit our political activities. That people, if you limit this, if you take money from some people and give it to others in the way that a redistributionist would want to do, then there's a political process inherent in that, and the politicians who are in charge of that are going to provide that same power in the form of resources to just other people, not necessarily the right people. So Friedman's talking about this trade-off. You could have government come in and kind of redistribute all of our resources equally across a society. But that has the same kind of impact as if we tried to do this in the political sphere. If we tried to limit people's ability to form factions, or if we tried to limit people's opinions, that's too damaging. It's never been done right. It's the wrong solution. It's not like this isn't a problem, but it's the wrong solution to that problem. So Friedman's view is that free exchange in the marketplace is absolutely the best solution that we have to this problem, to the problems of economic inequality. That if you want it, then he suggests that the most unequal places, the places where there's the biggest gap between the rich and the poor, are those places where the government controls the economic activity. Think about the gap between the rich and the poor in a place like North Korea, where the government controls all economic activity. So you've got to resist that. You've got to support freedom in the economic sphere if you support freedom in the political sphere. And that's what he talks about in the end here, where he's talking about a 19th century versus a 20th century liberal. So a 19th century liberal is all about freedom everywhere, that you should have the free exercise of political behavior, and you have the free exercise of economic behavior. Any limits on individual liberty are just bad and should be done with extreme care, whether it's limiting people's liberty in terms of political expression or limiting people's liberty in terms of economic activity. A 20th century liberal is very different. They say, well, we've got to get government involved here so that everybody's got enough resources so they can then participate in civic life. And here he's talking about Bowles and Gintis, essentially, right? That government's got to push back against these tendencies of a capitalist system. And he rejects that view entirely. He does not believe that the 20th century liberals are right, and he calls himself a liberal, and he talks about a liberalist agenda when he means a 19th century liberal agenda. Okay, so that concludes the lecture. Um, the point of all of this is for us to think generally about the system that we're in and the inherent tensions of that system. Dahl is talking about, well, there's this inherent tension between saying that government should come from the consent of the governed, but in many important ways, we don't consent to our system of government, but we consent, and particularly, we don't consent to the policies enacted by our government, but we consent to the process that we live under. Bowles and Gintis say, well, there's this tension between freedom in the political sphere and economic activity. And Friedman rejects the Bowles and Gintis view and says, no, if you want freedom, you've got to allow freedom in every respect.